Thank you so much. It's a real delight to be included in this edition of the magazine and to participate in this reading. This poem is called To Heed and Ignore Brain Chemicals, Mixed Signals. Fray of the fabric in time frames lapses, sends tangles of ellipses, skittering scatterplot, atoms fetching atoms, eulishly minuscule. In the pharmacy of writing, poetry's toxin and medicine, pristine antique paper outfoxed elements, nature remains the greatest antagonist. From lines in the panhandler's bare palm, number the days now to apocalypse. Along the body's interiors, inimitable scribbles. Through smoke-soaked air, the rust-color sunset. When the universe ought to make me persona non grata, I like to watch a muted choir to see the many mouths shaping themselves the same way. Afternoon arrives, airy and ethereal as hearsay. Thank you.
Thanks. Next up, we have Julia Chiapella reading from the poem Besotted.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Natasha. Wonderful to be here with all of you. We so need poetry right now. Besotted. Baby sister, you were sick, and we were on our knees. All those third graders, hands clasped, heads tilted toward the cross, that blood-smeared crown, our rise and fall in recitation. Hail Mary, full of grace. Naive supplicants, we worked to keep you here. Might not make it, doctors said. 50-50 chance, they said. Your tainted blood eclipsing newborn cheeks. You were 1 day old. And I was not penitent. 4 brothers before you, fed up with the tussle, the raw sweat, the grappling of hands, you'd be my safety net. Sweet sister, how could we know what would come? Planets in the churn, our wake of fertile innocence, pliant and fresh, pulling the unknown toward us, fishing line to the deep and dark, besotted as we were with all things defective, violated, besmirched. Your brand newness, doughy toes, papery nails, later broken by the long, unwanted plunder. Before all that, you made it safe a while. I watched your tiny body sleep, pour out its favors, one breath at a time. Thank you.
Next, we have Chizuroku reading This is a Poem About Shame.
Hi, everyone. This is a poem about shame is written as a tritina. And for those of you who aren't used to foul language, there is foul language everywhere in this. So brace yourselves. This is a poem about shame. You say she was a dumb fuck for letting him in. I say she was just a girl when. Pink ponies and reading rainbows are girl things that glitter. Life should glitter, not the shame, and not the men that fuck up a life. Now you are stuck, a complete mind fuck, and how many others, girl, coddle this type of shame? Fuck shame, the girl laughed. 2. When he says play, he means fuck, and I've been translating sex since I was a girl, but confuse its groans for shame. At my first communion, the priest spoke of shame, after he took me to a closet where we could fuck. A hint for the fuckers, do not fuck with girls. 2b. Me, woman, me, spirit fucked girl, now thrashing up a river of shame, swallowing the afterfuck. See how little fucks shame half the sky, girl? 3. Little girls, black fucks, blister shame. Shame, shame, shame on the greedy girls who don't give a fuck. The world is fucked, and boys bear no shame for fisting girls. What a shame. And this poem is for girls with no fucks left to give. Thank you.
All right. Next, we have Brett Francis reading From Deep in the Bowels of Suburbia by John Gray.
From Deep in the Bowels of Suburbia. Anna and Jake split up. She plays World of Warcraft with some other guy now. He sits at home watching violent shows on cable TV. Sometimes Allie stops in on his way to clog dancing. They share a bong. When the next MacArthur recipients are announced, neither expects to be named. Actually, the thing with Anna and the new guy only lasted a month. She's back with her mother. They don't talk much, at least not when it's time for America's Got Talent. Jake is slowly weaning himself off World of Warcraft. Grand Theft Auto is looking better by the night. His uncle Paul is serving 10 years for the real thing. Jake is too lazy to follow in Paul's footsteps. Paul always boasted, "No prison can hold me." This one did. His wife Pamela filed for divorce when he was inside. She married this muscle man who loves to high-five cops. They have a kid, Archie, like in the comics, who's into causes like Save the Whales. When Paul was a kid, his dream was to work at the local Blockbuster. But then again, Charlie's Angels was his favorite movie. Archie lives with his mother. She and Ernie, the muscle man, make sure to speak softly when they discuss her silicone implants. Ernie is deathly afraid of genetically modified foods, but has no problem abusing OxyContin. Archie has a girlfriend named Julie. She works as a file clerk at the zoning commission. Her father is an expert in voice recognition software, but when Julie calls him at work, she has to explain, "Pop, this is me, Julie."
All right. Next, we have Jennifer Litt reading her poem Rule Number 86.
Thank you, everyone, especially all the hardworking individuals who run this magnificent journal. Rule number 86, never smoke and drink when you're alone in bed. Because the brain hemorrhage strikes, the cigarette ignites the liquor that flambés the mattress, catches the curtains, and sets off the alarm that alerts the neighbors who call the fire barn. Because the fire station relies on small town volunteers who may be selling life insurance or used cars and answer late to location numbers blasted by the air-powered horn. Because your husband's playing piano on the Fall River to Bermuda line, your best friend Lily will curl up and wither, and your grandchildren yearn to know you better. Because your beauty's now an old wives' tale, party girls age out of their vices or sizzle, and you're visited by ghosts unfurling in smoke when you light up another one in bed. Thank you.
All right. Next, we have Catherine McCon reading her poem Midnight Unicorn.
Midnight Unicorn. Spices chili with dark chocolate and pours in beer, good, hard, dark beer. She whisked away from a devil's brewery, his frown a grab for sex. Midnight Unicorn likes to cook for mouths that ask her for sweet hot, deep red, full fiery tastes, dazzling waiting tongues, wet reach. Her kitchen's not for everyone. She chooses, she discerns that if she lets you share her apron, you can trust your mouth will burn.
All right, next up is Nancy Carroll Moody reading The Day the Tumor Began.
The day the tumor began, it was German on her trail run, tongue troweling her gums, dry throat working difficult vowels. Home again, she leaned with her phone on the countertop, hunting advice for pruning berries as the steadfast coffee maker whirred. The TV droned new recycling rules, projected weather variations 20 years out, discussed the star basketball player's injured knee. She tapped trash company acronyms on the small keyboard, searched a century of temperatures for her town, tried to grasp the meaning of a triple-double. There was no point in dragging yourself out of bed if you weren't going to learn something new in your day. If she believed in anything, she believed in this. She poured dark magic into her mug, held her face above it for a breath, the steam rising bitter from the shimmering black. The hell of it was, you could learn 10,000 million new facts, but the one you didn't know would turn out to be the one that mattered most. Thank you.
All right. Unfortunately, Elizabeth Murawski, who is co-winner of the Ellipsis Award, judged by Carolyn Forche, cannot join us tonight. So in her stead, I will be reading her poem on considering the killer of Stephen T. Johns. At first, I wanted him to die, the old man who shot the museum guard. Wounded, he lingered, full of tubes and critical, heart twisted as a backwards cross. But then I thought, no, let the rifle-toting racist survive. Sentence him to watch nightly the video of Stephen Jr., 11, skin soft as a peach, eyes numb with why. So much pride and love in this boy, suddenly without a father. Talking about the fishing trip they'd planned to take this summer. The clip could be the last thing this killer sees before lights out, when he lays his body down and tries to sleep. I want him to lie there in the dark of his cell, hostage to a face, a voice. I know it will never happen, that it's just me talking to the TV, wanting justice for the museum guard who held the door for him, the old man who walked in like a tourist or a scholar and opened fire. Next up is Anne Miles, another co-winner of the Ellipsis Award, reading Bane.
Thank you all very much. Bane. Even as a girl, I felt the subtle ache of something hidden growing, pushing against my heart and breath. Could it have been a rock whose weight I carried slung against my ribs, that hard singularity, that dense cold? Or perhaps it was a sleek canister of poison gas. Some days I'd swear I could feel it writhing. I walked slowly, carefully, so I wouldn't jostle it. Or maybe it was a fetus, as in my dreams of babies who'd turn out to be unreal or dead, with me so terribly relieved. But more likely it was a demon curled against my spine, asleep or stirring its cramped limbs. I'd start up at times to realize I'd been soothing it, whispering the name I called it, Bane. Or was it a seed dark and lustrous, splitting and rooting into the rock, unfurling its lone stalk to cast out lines on emptiness, defining the blue of an October sky with a dragonfly buzzing through it. Now, perhaps? Thanks.
All right. Next up is Toady O'Brien reading the poem I Like Birds Because I Ain't One.
I like birds because I ain't one. The dead pigeon, spread eagle upon the checkered pavement, has been flattened by chubby tires so much. Now it barely reads against the background, meekly espousing its shades. Same gray, lighter here, darker there. Same discreet hints of red, a small claw and a large pool of blood. The young man boards the van to the airport, holding high twin bouquets of bright yellow, mimosa and sunflowers. He sits straight. When he leaves the bus, he walks regally, as if leading a long, invisible train. Something like a golden halo surrounds him. In a damp cave of green, a cardinal bird climbs a diagonally bent bamboo reed. It hops, delicate and tentative, as if just exploring the idea of altitude, as if never having found open still its freshly delivered feathers. Then it briskly takes flight, reaching bravely the highest branch of a nearby tree. No one, not even I, witness its secret training as it hides in the privacy of Eden lost. I cannot recall the tint of the rubber gloves worn by the security officer. Her speech sounded both clinical and fabulous as she explored my groin and the inner side of my thighs. The light from the ceiling shone ominous. She sprinkled over my hands and her own a mysterious powder, then asked the computer screen for some formulas. I expect, with stoic concern, with strange equanimity, to be turned into a tiny tree frog, perhaps to grow wings. Thank you.
All right, next is Lisa Roulard reading Fugitive, How It Is.
Hi, this is a persona poem in the voice of a fugitive who's been on the run for many years. Fugitive, how it is. Your secret steeps, another Tuesday, another February, wishing each footstep could snare the last print, erase it. Trail of ingrown toenails, of boots broken, laces snapped, treading by flashlight, by ache, through the skeletal harbor of trees. And it's raining, cold raining. Moss clogs the years. Do you landslide? The mud of you spilling, splattering? The shape truth takes. No, no, for now you are mountain, built by the years, rock-rooted and armored with trees. Thanks.
Next, we have Carrie Troutman reading Pasque Flower.
Pasque Flower. As if petals snipped from towels frozen to Lake Erie sand, as if Christ curled himself against his boulder, as if returned for Mary Magdalene, as if wishing for an end to ice brings sun, as if sun makes good on squinted promises, as if it is enough to be purple and soft, as if softness and purpleness fend off late killing frost, as if regret could manifest from soil, as if an old virgin wished she hadn't waited so long for nothing, as if a young non-virgin wishes to float back into the soil, as if all we have to do is make it till April, as if all we have to do is flex open to still cold sun, as if secrets could begin in the womb, as if they could be taken to the tomb, as if violet petals aren't the answer to reseeding ourselves, as if beige pom-poms were, as if they would detach and float into May, as if May were Lake Erie baptizing what falls in, as if we could float ourselves back to the soil, as if we could recreate. Thanks.
All right, next up we have Michaelis Lyons reading My Mother Has Begun Picking by Richard Weaver.
My Mother Has Begun Picking by Richard Weaver. Mother has begun picking the low-lying fruit from our family tree. There are so many of us, we should have numbers tattooed on our wrists rather than prescribed biblical names. She's not a fan of eugenics so much as a woman who has whelped more than her share of Catholic babies in her all too fertile years. My father, her husband, opines ejecting sperm forcefully is a moral obligation, obliged by the church and therefore God, who clearly believes there are no limits in a finite world. Many would argue, whose voices are synchronous in monotone, lockstep in labial disinformation. My mother insists that all lights be left shining at all times, and all times lead to end times. No neighbors are allowed to harvest what hangs low or has fallen. We are not the sharing kind. Our hopes, our saliva, the dreams that shape our worldly paradise are ours alone, but our hunting dogs we freely let loose whenever a radar screen blip appears, or a ground sensor wakens with footfalls. We are a clan unto ourselves, set apart from our neighbors who are, like us, wholly incorporated small towns. We may long to look across the not so straight and narrow river, even when the sun seeks to punish our eyes. We may wish in one hand, then shit in the other, and wait to see which overflows first. But our purpose lies beyond the obvious now, in the hollow-hearted friends that might but never will be. If we are the world's future, and we are, we must be firm in our mores and laws. We must acknowledge and accept our fate, the end and the regenesis of life on earth. Thank you.
All right, next, Bailey Willis, the winner of the student poetry contest judged by Carolyn Forche, will read Love in a Mist.
This poem is addressed to Prometheus, the ancient Greek Titan god of fire. The poem describes Prometheus's most famous myth, in which he defies the other gods by stealing fire and giving it as a gift to humans. Love in a Mist. On a cliffside, there's a poppy seed pile of ants sputtering against the pavement, overlooking the highway with its tangle of overpass. And there's a sweet smell of summer wine from the bush grass and the cattails half filled in. Your liver's out, Prometheus, eaten but not getting any smaller, disappearing except for the little stain behind the ears, sulfur yellow that we both know is pollen from the fennel flower you hid that fire in, a cloth of gold to cover up your misplaced Anthropocenic adoration. Always bashful, weren't you? But that liver dangling out of you like a loose tooth. I gotta ask, honey sap, was it worth it?
Next, we have Taden Anderson reading Adder by Lenore Wilson.
Adder, little duende of pith and phlegm, the emery winds rustling like mountain shadows through water, leaving your eggshell cavities murmurous, while the ground below turns to dust and the air blooms with smoke. Whose earth is it, pestilential beast, lonely disciple? What exegesis of the heart did you prophesize? What blood-red catacombs above our heads when the heavens opened? Why is love so insistent, so urgent? Why am I called from numbness to knowing, veil, hood, mask? I have nothing to protect me. The fire came. The decadent flames slowly inched forward, like an infant crawling feet first down a steep flight of stairs. Is this how my novella ends? Some elderly new future against the black particles, as if they were wafers of glass from the body of Christ. How do I disentangle myself from lightning, the last dashed embers?
All right, next up we have Carrie Withington reading Faculty Meeting.
Sorry, I am here. My computer is just being awkward. And I just want to say thank you. I have held on to this poem for a long time, and I'm very excited for it to be in a journal edited by students. Faculty meeting, beginning of the semester. Don't give them the image. He tells me to make students work for it, as if poetry is the minimum wage our students can earn after class. Physically demanding, a little degrading, and never quite enough. They should make the effort on the text without bridging. As if poems weren't like peonies blossoming, buds dense and soft, the pink of sunrise through my window. I respond with research, pedagogy, but even though my bones know that our students deserve more, that poetry is about survival, he's looking over my shoulder for someone better. So I go to class to arm my students with words. Thank you.
All right, next up we have Miranda Campbell, who will now read an excerpt of Second Chances Are for Suckers.
I just want to make sure everyone can hear me. Can they? It's a little windy out here. Okay. All right, so I'm going to be reading in the middle of it. Just so some things maybe you should know is that the main character is playing pool with someone that she used to date. She's kind of hoping that things will go differently, but sort of coming to the conclusion that it's probably always better to move forward than to backslide or to stay stuck in the past, I guess I would say. I thought of the first time we hung out and played cornhole at his house. He'd suggested we place bets on the game. I told him if I won, he owed me a kiss. He said if he won, I owed him a kiss. At the time, I remember thinking that he stole and repeated my bet, didn't up the ante, and therefore it was lame. But I also remember how badly I wanted to kiss him, so I didn't care. It was a win-win. He ended up beating me, and our kiss was sloppy and a little forced because it was bred of a bet, but it was still good. I knew because I liked it, and right after he told me I was a good kisser. Let's make it interesting, I said, raising an eyebrow. I banked on nostalgia, but he turned his head and said, nah. He saw the hurt in my face and mumbled something about the game already being interesting enough. It was a rejection. That much was clear. But I thought of my friend Tina of how much I wanted to prove her wrong, how much I wanted to be the exception to the rule. So I pushed. Oh, I see. You're worried I'm going to fall in love with you again. He didn't say anything, so I pressed on. You know, you've hurt me before. You can't hurt me again. He didn't say anything. I knew the idea was ridiculous, but saying it aloud actually felt true. That the worst thing that could happen between us already did. I felt I was exonerated, exempt. A lightning bolt rarely strikes twice in the same place kind of situation. Or at the very least, that from the time he first broke my heart to now, I toughened up. I was prepared. My eyes were wide open. He laughed and leaned down to shoot another stripe. I recognize a laugh as a non-answer. A let's play through and hope the conversation switches. This time, I didn't push. I wanted to believe my eyes were wide open, but I had been wrong. Once you've had feelings for a person, it's not so strange to develop them again. People say that about sex. Once you've slept with someone, it's easier to sleep with them again. I realize the same is true for pain and heartache. Maybe it's not red hot, immediate pain. Maybe it doesn't even make you cry. But the hurt is there, just a duller, cooler pain, dormant under the surface, but delicate to the touch. Earlier, when we got out of his truck and awkwardly one arm hugged each other after getting to the bar, I couldn't help but sense we'd always be tarnished. Like our hanging out now was just the stale leftover of what was a decent meal before. We would never get back there. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought perhaps we shouldn't. Cold food reheated is rarely as good as the hot plate served before. Thanks.
All right. Next, we have Jake Kirkwood reading The Watchmen by Adoraj Kashyap.
All right, so this is an excerpt from the story The Watchmen by Adoraj Kashyap. It's a story about a student observing the sentry in his neighborhood while attending film school in Delhi, India. I can't recall seeing him without his uniform ever. A light blue shirt with dark gray pants, as if it were an extension of his own skin. He would wear a sweater on top of it and tie a muffler around his head during the frosty Delhi winters. He would always carry a stick with him. When I first saw him holding the stick, I took it to be a walking stick, which he needed for support. But it was much later that I realized that every watchman in those housing colonies in Delhi had a stick. It was, in a way, an innate part of their personality. The watchman in B block of our colony also had one. It was presumably to scare thieves away, or perhaps to shoo away the stray dogs that were also integral parts of the colony. But it almost felt like the foremost object of the stick was to make repetitive sounds at night.
All right. Next up, we've got A. Moloktov reading an excerpt from Some Information About Pedro Ramirez.
Well, thank you so much, Hannah, and thank you to all the editors for having me. As a writer who's originally from Russia, I want to mention that I'm horrified by Putin's war in Ukraine, and just a horrible thing that makes me ashamed of this country where I come from, even though I moved here 30 years ago. Anyway, I just wanted to mention this. Now, this story was written about 30 years ago, so it's in a different part of my life, but it's a story about a writer who is having these different strange and surreal experiences. And I'll read a fragment. 6 years ago, I wrote On Giant's Track. I was quite proud of myself. It was my best work thus far. I sent it off to the publisher, expecting her excited acceptance. A few days later, a telegram arrived. Dear Senor Ramirez, I was suggesting new edition. Please highlight corrections. I utterly dislike telegrams, even though most people seem to enjoy sending and receiving them. I could not fathom what they wanted of me. I demanded an explanation. From the reply, I learned something unbelievable. Apparently, the publisher was convinced that I had already written a novel with that title. Later, she called me and assured that the new manuscript was completely identical to my novel On Giant's Track, published in 2009. I hung up confused, uncertain if my life was what I had perceived as my life. I couldn't believe this absurd occurrence. But a thorough inspection of my special shelf revealed that the novel had fallen behind other books and magazines featuring my work. I'd forgotten all about it. How was this possible? I had lost almost a year to this distressful selective amnesia. There wasn't even a slightest difference between the old and the new versions. Is any artist capable of such a supernatural consistency? Was it merely another coincidence? Unfortunately, this was not the end of it. 2 years ago, it happened again. It met me out of shape for quite some time. When I had finally recovered, I was glad to be back to work. I was hoping writing would help me get over the crisis. Indeed, it felt wonderful, but when I showed the first chapter to a good friend and confidant, we were in for a shock. I had written the beginning of On Giant's Track, and if the only thing one could do under the circumstances, I ordered a sign that read, "Never write on Giant's Track." Below that, in a small font, I quoted the first several sentences, just in case. I hung the sign on the wall by my desk. Since then, each time I start writing that novel, sooner or later, the sign grabs my attention and I indignantly erase the newly written pages. Discussing this is difficult. The sign has helped me tell the story clearly, but in truth, I'm far from certain that I have ever written a novel whose title referenced a physically unique personality. This topic seems interesting, something I should work on soon, perhaps tonight. Thank you.
Next up, we have the winner of the Ann Newman Sutton Weeks Student Prose Contest, Samantha Paredes. She will be reading from The Wheat and the Chaff.
Hi everyone, I'm so excited to be here making my Ellipsis debut, and I will just be reading the first chapter of The Wheat and the Chaff. 1. Rain hisses with the sharp October wind ruffling through the plains like playful fingers through hair. Inside the cabin, the fat of freshly fried bacon still sizzles in its pan. Grace, the mother, has just gone outside into the stable to tend to the horses. Justice, the older brother, is supposed to be keeping watch outside the cabin, but has nodded off in a high-backed wooden chair. The musket of that father who abandoned him is still clutched in his right hand. Charity, the younger sister, was sent out when it was still light out to fetch a pail of water for the evening meal. She has not come back. Crickets chirp. A raven screams of death, and the sound of the sparkling stream remains uninterrupted in the stillness of the night. The mother returns a moment later into the cabin to find that the door swung open with her son asleep in his chair. Suspecting a burglary, she pushes herself inward with a horrified gasp, only to find a scene out of her worst nightmares. Lying in the center of a black circle drawn with charcoal is a small scythe, placed neatly atop the crumpled, bloody remains of Charity's finest white dress and bonnet. The mother's disconsolate scream is the only sound which awakens Justice from his nap. She tears through the fields separating her home from the minister's, growing wider and more treacherous while her son tails her. When her frenzied knocks bring him to the door, she stumbles into his home and collapses into a pitiful heap. "Grace!" exclaims Josiah, tugging at her hands to bring her to her feet. "What ails thee, child?" "Oh, Lord God, help me," she cries. Minister Turner, sir, my child, she's been taken. Someone's stolen my charity. The minister's face, white and angular like a Greek statue, softened with concern. Just now, I come into the house after tending to the horses and find her dress and bonnet all stained with blood and a scythe laying atop it. Oh God, what can this mean? He kneels to speak at her level. A scythe, you say? Yes. She shakes her head. Well, no, it looked like a scythe, only smaller. We will search for Charity come sunrise, I promise you that. Have you any idea where she may have gone? Oh no, not gone. She was taken, Josiah. Someone took my baby. You must find her. He assures her that he will and urges her to go home. Distraught, but trusting in his judgment, Grace is helped up by her son and walked back to the house. That night, she lies awake, occasionally dozing into a fitful sleep replete with nightmares and shadows of strange men and the sound of a little girl screaming.
Next up, we have an excerpt from Anne Reid's short story, Signs. Is Anne Reid here? All right, we can move on. Next will be John Sandman reading an excerpt of Notes for a Eulogy.
Thank you, Hannah. I'm going to read the beginning of the story, so I'm hoping it doesn't need any setting up. Notes for a Eulogy. When I walked into the room where my 95-year-old father was dying, first thing I noticed was his mouth. It was wide open. He looked like a character in a cartoon screaming. His mouth was open so wide it looked as if his jaw must hurt. With his eyes closed, his glasses off, and the gaping mouth, he did not look at all like himself. During his life, he was a man who, for the most part, kept his mouth closed. I did not hear how hard he was breathing until I got close to him, because the oxygen tank emitted a loud, constant hum. A two-pronged oxygen tube was hooked into his nose. It was hard to believe that much oxygen was getting into his nose, given the long, desperate gasps coming out of his mouth. What happened over the next days was that the gasps were gradually longer and longer apart. When my brother Phil called to tell me that my father was dying, the first thing I did was to volunteer to give the eulogy. Phil is my only sibling, and he did my mother's eulogy, so it was my turn. And there were other factors. I'm an English teacher, and Phil is an accountant, so theoretically, writing a eulogy should be in my wheelhouse. Also, after my mother died, Phil and his wife Jenny moved my father to an assisted living home near where they lived. I lived 5 hours away, and in my father's final years, I was only a weekend visitor. Many years ago, after I brought my ex-wife to meet my family for the first time, she said to me, "Do you realize that 90% of what you say to each other is sarcastic?" I had not realized that. Since I come from a family where we are rarely sincere and where we almost never express our feelings, it made writing a eulogy challenging. The insults we traded around the house were not going to provide fodder for a tribute. Thank you.
Next, we have Karen Wuntch reading an excerpt from Feel My Warm Hands, a memoir.
Thank you. During the summer, when I was around 10, I'd take the train by myself from New York to Cleveland and visit my father's sister and her husband. I wasn't particularly close to my Uncle Dave, but my Aunt Ruth was warm and cheerful, and I adored her. I'd stay for around 2 weeks, and while I was there, I'd try not to think about going back to our tension-filled Manhattan apartment, where my remote psychoanalyst father and depressed narcissistic mother were very unhappy together. Ruth and Dave lived in a big house in Shaker Heights with their daughter Jackie, who was 8 years older than me and often away when I was there. In the morning, my Aunt Ruth would come into the guest room with a deck of cards and sit on my bed. She was thin, with short black hair, very white skin, and freckles across her nose. I was thin too, with big dark eyes. People were always telling me to smile. Before breakfast, we'd play many games of spite and malice. Bemoaning her bad luck, she'd pretend not to notice my cheating. At some point, we'd go to my aunt's bedroom, and while I'd use the silver-backed comb and hairbrush on her dresser and sniff the perfume in the many fancy bottles, she'd tell me stories. I loved her stories, like how my uncle would tiptoe on their thick bedroom carpet in the morning so as not to wake her, and then inadvertently slam the bedroom door when he left. Unlike my mother, whose stories about my father tended to be bitter or mocking, my aunt always sounded affectionate. One of my favorite stories was about the time when Ruth was young and suffered from Addison's disease. Eventually, cortisone saved her life, and when I knew her, she was fine. Once, when she was in the hospital, she became aware of a horrible smell coming from the room across the hall. That poor patient must be terribly sick. The medicine smells so bad, she said to one of the doctors. He explained that the woman suffered from a really offensive body odor that no amount of washing or deodorant could get rid of. Eventually, someone in a lab came up with a chemical that helped her so much, it was later used in Dial deodorant soap. For years, I'd ask people, do you know how Dial soap came to be invented? Even though few of them seemed to find the story as satisfying as I did. Thank you.
Is Brent Amanero here?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right, you're up next.
Okay, thank you so much. My poem's called How to Move On. Temperatures rise, killing even the hardiest of shrubs. Deer and elk migrate east, the soil hardens and splinters. A cemetery and an elementary school share a parking lot. All around are pastures where cows often appear suddenly from the fog. Always a line of cars around the block, never anyone amongst the tombstones, yet fresh red roses come and go. There's a sign about uneven terrain near the entrance of the cemetery, and a sign about back to school night in bright green and blue on the other side of the speed bump. Morning dew burns away, sweaters fall on the playground. Just before the bell rings, one kid hides under his seat on the bus. He cries as the bus driver coaxes him down the stairs.
All right, now I'll turn it over to Natasha Saye for an introduction to our featured reader.
One of the things I like, among the many things about Ellipsis, is that we invite a poet who has a new book out, who was previously published in Ellipsis. And today it's my great pleasure to welcome Cindy King as our featured reader. Cindy published poems in the magazine years ago, but her first full-length collection, Zoonotic, came out from Tinderbox Editions this year. It was worth the wait. It's a funny and smart book that will turn people who say they don't like poetry into people who are eager to read more of it. The poems vary wildly in form and tone, so the book could also serve as a very cool introduction to contemporary American poetry. Zoonotic refers to diseases that transfer from animal to human, including many that plague us today: Lyme disease, malaria, dengue, Ebola, COVID-19, and HIV. Of course, Cindy's poems are not scourges. Rather, they are animals in the expansive zoo of her imagination, ones that skipped into my consciousness and made me see the light and the darkness behind it. Please welcome Cindy King.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Natasha. That was wonderful. And I want to thank Ranjan for having me in his class on Thursday. That was wonderful to talk to your students and read them some poems. And most of all, I want to thank Ellipsis, and it's such an honor to be among such great contributors. I published the poem in Ellipsis 20 years ago. So it is unreal how much time has passed and how much my writing has changed, and I guess my life as well. So thank you everyone for coming. I kind of, after hearing everyone read, changed the order of the poems that I have for you tonight. So many of you probably know that this is National Poetry Month, right? My guess is National Poetry Month. Everyone knows. Maybe fewer of you know that it's Sexual Assault Awareness Month. On campus, you may have had the "What Were You Wearing" exhibit. We had it here on campus. This is a new poem. It's modeled after Harriet Mullen's poem, Elliptical. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with that poem, but I thought I'd start out with this poem in light of some of the other poems that we've heard. So this poem is called Fault. If only she would have. Didn't she know that? She should have. Why didn't she? How didn't she? How could she have? She was the only one who she should have known not to. She just shouldn't have. She was way too. Why wasn't she? She just didn't. What was she? Where were her? How could she? She must have been. She didn't. How could she be so? Didn't she realize? She just wasn't. She didn't understand that. How could she not have known that? Why didn't she simply? She should have, if only. And then I'm going to go skip around a little bit. And I want to read, since there was a piece on elegy, or I'm sorry, writing eulogies for fathers, I thought I'd go ahead and read this next poem. It's called Elegy for a Eulogy. I don't know if anyone has ever had to write anything while you were on a plane, especially at night, taking a red eye. Several of you sound like you've made references to Cleveland. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, so I'll read my Cleveland poem too, but this poem is called Elegy for a Eulogy. You asked me to deliver the eulogy at Dad's memorial service, to spare the survivors of our family the mortifying prospect of public speaking. For 5 hours, I've flown above Earth, wordlessly over great plains and rocky mountains. Under a moon of reading light, I have learned why no one ever calls it a light by which to write. I have failed the galaxy, didn't listen to the stars. I would have rather brought more lilies than to say what I remember. Brought another noodle casserole. Let me rummage instead through your pantry, Mom. Tear wild violets from your yard. But please don't ask me to see him from a distance, to view him with a naked eye, to show him as a moon without blemish, free of rills, scars, dark sides. I'm going to go ahead and also read another. This is the new chapbook, Lesser Birds of Paradise. I'm going to go ahead and jump back to my original plan. This poem is called Daily Affirmations. Most of you probably know, English majors, word people, what a portmanteau is. It's when you push two words together, like brunch is breakfast and lunch. This is a combination of affirmations and devotions. You know, affirmations, if you remember that old Saturday Night Live skit where we have Stuart Smalley saying in the mirror, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough. And then devotions kind of like prayers. Daily affirmations. Those pains in your chest aren't a heart attack. It's that bra you've been wearing since high school. No, you're not fat. Your friend's just built like a runway model. That face you glimpsed in the storefront window, don't worry, it wasn't yours. And of course they sell those jeans in your size. You look old in that picture only because you're holding a newborn, but no worries, that baby's not yours. You're not pregnant for at least 5 different reasons, and certainly not one of them is menopause. That's a pimple, a hangnail, an ordinary mole. Did you forget you left your place a mess? No, you haven't been burglarized. No one has used your credit card in El Paso. No one's charged a slushie, a Slim Jim, and 50 cartons of Winston's. Yes, you spell checked that message, changed shits to shirts before clicking send. And that letter, yes, it had plenty of postage. The receiver has just chosen not to reply. Your car is in parking brake on. It has not rolled through the garage door, down the driveway, and out into the quiet street. No, your headlights aren't on. Those are white hydrangeas, not doctors staked in the bushes. No, that's a unicorn, not a police car. Relax, no one's looking at you. That fine young gentleman's not staring. He sees right through to the unicorn standing behind you. And as for God, you're good. God doesn't see you either. Some of you probably remember Latchkey Kids. I hope there aren't too many of them anymore. A Latchkey Kid, it was like back in the 70s when your parents were at work and you had to come home and you wore a key around your neck so you could let yourself in because your parents weren't home. They called that parenting in the 70s. Maybe now it's more like child abuse. But this is a poem called Night Shift. And you'll see in my book, there's in some of the poems I'm going to read about work. I grew up in a blue collar family, and both of my parents worked. My mom worked 2 jobs at one point to help send me to college. So this poem's called Night Shift. I start listening to houseplants. Learn their dead languages. A fly lands in my soup and I eat around it until the bowl is empty. Everyone loses something eventually. My neck carries the weight of my head, buckling with the thoughts that live there. The withered mouth of the philodendron smiling broadly. In the middle of the night, I replace the batteries of the TV remote that has been so faithful and patient with me. Across the alley in the shop of the garment maker, 100 hands stitch trim onto jackets, sew sleeves to shoulders, steam creases and seams. While I lie awake in television light, waiting for the night to end, and for the third shift mothers to be returned to their children. And I'll go ahead and read a poem called Mama Garde Manger. And garde manger, it's a pantry chef. It's someone who cooks, or I should say, assembles salads and peels shrimp and helps the chef do the prep work. My mom worked in a hotel. She also in the evenings and then worked in a school cafeteria during the daytime. So this is a poem from my mom. And it's interesting, the word manger, it looks like manger. So it looks like kind of like Mama Garde Manger. Mama Garde Manger. Was it for the manager as much as it was for me, for my father, for our acre of mud, for the withered rows of corn stalks blanching in the rain, for the platters and oyster knives, for the thread of their blades, for the poaching, the pickling, for the brine, for her knuckles split and the blood rising from the sting, for her neck bowed as if worshiping the work of the hands, for the back bent, the shoulders, for her body curved, committed to murderous disassembly, for her feet raw and the boots failings? Was it for the third shift sunlight, beautiful if it weren't so ugly, for eyes and entrails, soft shell scales, for peach sangria in the drain? Or was it for the stoop in the styrofoam cooler hosting its own frozen season? Or for the breath she held, the smoke expelled in delinquent streams, thick, forgetful, distracted by wind, vanishing before it even knew where it was going? I'm going to go ahead and move, I have tons of time. I'm going to move into a poem called Possession. And my guess is you guys have put together furniture, whether it was from IKEA or Target. It seems like no furniture is assembled anymore. I've moved around quite a bit. If you've ever had a breakup or with a partner or suffered a loss, extracting your things from theirs can be kind of difficult. So putting furniture together and extracting the things. Possession. Open package. Remove styrofoam. Discard styrofoam. Do not eat styrofoam. Keep staples from wrists. Keep staples from eyes. Remove all parts, base, top shelves, dowels, anxiety, screws, nail holder, nails, rage, brackets, back panel. These instructions, you've done that. Depression, espresso colored stickers, cat standing on package. Place items on carpet, no carpet. Place items on scratch-free surface, not beneath cat. Gather shelves into one area, gather hardware into another. Everything will appear to be hardware. Everything has the potential to scratch. Find hammer. Keep hammer away from head. Keep hammer away from heads of others. Find screwdriver. Find it as the wrong kind. Cry into hands. Try not to cry into hands. Try not to cry. Try never to cry again. Attach sides to base with wooden dowels. What are dowels? The only items from package made from actual wood. Withhold judgment. Attach top to base. See frame wobble, see frame collapse, repeat previous steps, not all steps, only those necessary. What is necessary? That which eliminates wobble, that which prevents collapse. Do not eat styrofoam, keep staples from wrist, keep force screws into pre-drilled holes, not those pre-drilled holes, the other ones. Start by using fingers, feel screws bite skin, finish with screwdriver, still the wrong kind. Unfold back panel, yes, it is not one piece. Yes, it is held together with packing tape. Withhold judgment. Resist impulse to quit. Repress urge to give up. Use tape measure. Search for tape measure. Search for tape measure. Search for tape measure. Using your judgment, you may judge now. Position back panel. Do not use tape. Attach to frame with nails at even intervals. Even intervals. Use nail holder, not fingers. Use nail holder. There should be no leftover nails. There are leftover nails. Place shelf pins in pre-drilled holes. Yes, those holes. Shelves should not slope. Shelves should be even. Shelves should not slide onto scratch-free surface. Position bookcase in bedroom. Unpack box labeled Tom's books. Unpack box labeled mine. Forget difference. Forget distinction. Shelve together. Books, bookshelves, espresso colored stickers. Everything is yours. And I think I'm doing okay on time. Maybe two more. I'm going to go ahead and read another one from Zoonotic. It's on, and I was honored to have Tracy K. Smith, the former poet laureate, choose this poem for her podcast, The Slow Down, and it was remarkable to hear my poem in her magnificent voice. This is called When Your Mother Asks If You're Seeing Anyone, It No Longer Means a Therapist. It's tough to find a cardiologist who dates patients from the ward of cracked hearts. But there's always the bariatric surgeon who thinks you could drop a few pounds. If it's too late for the death row inmate, try the child predator. You too could date the would-be senator or even the president of the United States. If you can't have the priest, don't give up. You too could fall for the charismatic cult leader. You too could try the celibate polygamist. Admittedly, you'd have to share and you wouldn't know for sure if you're actually dating or whether you'd ever consummate. But who's in it for that kind of thing anyway? Unless, of course, you'd finally give me a grandchild. You didn't spend years in braces only to settle for a dental assistant, did you? We didn't correct your overbite just so you could eat your dinners alone. It took sacrifice to cultivate your eligibility, years of home perms and hand-me-downs, decades of clearance rack cosmetics. And yet the people you called friends were privileged enough to discover your brain and not your body. BTW, did you see that profile pic of the head floating in a jar? Though I'm not sure if it's really enough to love, but love you will, as everyone does, toward infinite grace, the axe into the olive branch, verisimilitude to abstraction, even the sarcophagus toward mummy dust, the intellect to its dementia. And I will support you as the mantle above the fireplace supports the little box, house to your spouse's ashes. And then just one more for the Cleveland or Ohio folks out there. You may be familiar with Ambler Heights. It's kind of near Cleveland Heights. My brother lives in Cleveland Heights and has a restaurant, and I visit frequently. My family still lives in Cleveland, and I usually take the red eye and get in at 5 a.m. And he works late, so I sometimes take the train into town, and he'll pick me up in Little Italy near Ambler. No context. At 5 a.m. under the red line platform in Ambler Heights, you can't see the river. Sunrise breaking across the water, sunshine warming the sandstone of the Hope Memorial Bridge. Unseen from here are its sandstone carvings, those Art Deco guardians of promise, progress, and industry. There is a man on the street who looks as if his will has been ransomed, a deposed king in demolition boots, his coat resembling a mastodon hide. Ice-aged, king dethroned, yet another mammal on the verge of extinction. Here at 5 a.m., under the platform of the red line, it feels as though nothing is possible. Here, no one ever called brushing your teeth, flopping on a mattress post third shift, a prelude to a beautiful dream. I'm so goddamned and defeated. I can't believe no one has asked me to marry them. In Ambler, nobody is made in the image of God. Good morning, people of the platform, lost on your way to or from work in clouds of your own making, pot smoke, frozen breath, your own private microclimate. Good morning, beatboxers and everyone, sellers of loose cigarettes, of aluminum and copper wire, and to those leaning on windows still asleep, or for those propped up in the bus stop shelter. False friends, my high school teacher called them, fog and wave, gift and poison, pawn and pain. 2 words, imposters, one posing as another. False friends, true enemies, all the same. Close and close, tear and tear, wound and wound. These they call heteronyms, impossible to say without context, like how it's cold and dark at 5 a.m. and hard to say why I'm standing here in the absence of context, living my life without reference. I recently learned about contronyms, words like dust, fix, apology. Dust can mean to both add and remove particles. Clouds dust the streets with snow. Wind dusts the snow away. Murder in the first degree is the worst, but is the mildest when used to describe a burn. The Hope Memorial Bridge does not, as the name implies, memorialize the loss of hope, that naive and childish longing, nor was it named to instill it. Hope refers to the father of the famous entertainer, a man lesser known for his stonemasonry. When I say I'm finished, how I wish I meant that I accomplished, right, how I've completed or accomplished something. But when I say it now, I'm finished, it means I'm completely done for. Thanks.
All right. Thank you all for coming tonight. At this point, we welcome everyone to unmute and offer a round of applause for our readers.
Woo! Bravissimo. Bravo, everybody. Fabulous readers.
Yes.
Fabulous writers.
Outstanding debut. And stick around and talk to us. I'll stop the recording. So it'll be